Welcome, you guys, to our next episode of the podcast. Today, we have a wonderful person with us, Bruce Berg. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for taking the time to have a conversation and kind of share your wisdom with us. And I'd like to start by you just kind of talking a little bit of your history in the industry, how you stumbled in this industry, and why you've stayed and made a big career out of it.
Okay, sure. Well, you mentioned stumbling into the industry, and that's exactly what happened. Although at the time I stumbled into the industry, there was no industry. There were some people doing background checks, but there surely wasn't an industry. I was in Tampa at the time, and I came across a fellow who had started a background screening company in 1988. He had been a polygraph examiner and done pre-employment polygraphs. He and his wife were in the business, just the two of them, and had a nice little business doing pre-employment polygraphs. And in 1988, they outlawed polygraphs for pre-employment purposes. And so he was, without a business. And so they decided they would do background checks. And they actually went out and had a program written to be able to have the end user, the employer, enter the request for the background check into a piece of DOS software that would pop up on their computer, and they would enter the demographic information, the type of searches they wanted to do, and hopefully the data would be sent in a little packet to us, which would then explode within our software, and then we would go out, we would generate pieces of paper for every part of that background check, and have somebody then act on that piece of paper. And in fact, it was designed where they would mail out with a check and a request for a criminal record search out to every county in the country. It was working for them. It was actually doing things, and they were doing a little bit of business, and they they grew, but then they stopped growing, and they realized they also weren't making any money. So I was out looking for a business opportunity, and I stumbled across him, and with my business background, working in Fortune 500 companies most of my career, I knew how to run a business, how to build a business. He knew the technical part of it and the background screening part of it. And I just thought it was cool. I went in there and went out looking for venture capital to get the company. And we went out for $1 million worth of venture capital. We were going to blow this thing up. It was going to be phenomenal. And I couldn't get anybody to have any interest in investing money in us at all. I mean, I couldn't get my friends to invest money in it. They have background checks. What the hell's background checks? It was just, not
A
nothing.
new concept.
So I decided to talk to my wife, and I said, well, the only way we're going to make this thing happen is to bootstrap it. She said, okay. She went out and got a job, which got us health insurance and a little bit of cash flow coming in. And I got into the business and started to learn it and see what was happening and put together this business plan to bring in venture capital. And after 3 months, we realized we were going no place with that. Then we lost our largest client, which was about 1/3 of our business. I started putting money into the business, and I started putting on every hat you can imagine: the marketing hat, the operations hat, the sales hat. Well, we didn't really have a compliance hat back then because there's no such thing. We didn't care about the FCRA. It didn't mean anything to us at all at the time. It was nice. It was the wild, wild west, as they say back in the day.
You're laying on the ground for what we see today.
Yes, it was a start. They didn't know I was doing it, but we were doing it. So then we started bringing on new clients, and that we started to grow, and we realized that the technology we had wasn't going to be sufficient, and plus we didn't have the source code to it. The fellows that left took it with them and didn't give it to the owner of that source code. So we rewrote all the technology. We rewrote it in Windows. In 1995, we came out with a Windows-based ordering system, and SHRM happened to be in Orlando that year at National Conference, and so we got some huge monitors and some huge tower computers and took them over there and set up our booth, and people were lined up, knee deep to see what we had, and it was really cool Windows technology. In fact, there were about 5 other screening companies exhibiting there, and they all had technology, and by the second hour of the show being open, they all put their technology away because they're so rudimentary compared to what we had. So that was about the time that HR people were getting computers on their desktop, and they needed Windows to be able to operate because it's a common platform rather than all kinds of different DOS programs. So we hit the sweet spot, and we had our deal together. We had gone from about 200,000 in sales And by the time we released that, we were probably $600,000 or $700,000 in sales, and doing a kind of break even kind of a situation. So, but we kept growing it, and that was a great conference for us. And we brought on some additional people to help us, and we kept growing. Then I brought on a couple of salespeople, and was very lucky. I hired two gals. Those two salespeople had brought in probably 75% of my business. They were just good at what they did. And what's interesting was that they had worked in operations before I brought them into the sales department, and they didn't want to come into the sales department. And what I told them was, I said, look, you're going to be great. You're here to help our clients. We're not trying to sell them a used car that's going to fall apart as they drive it down the street. You worked in operations. You know how we bust our butts to do things right, and that'll come across in your conversation to them. I said, if after 3 months you want to go back into operations, you'll get your job back at the same pay. Meanwhile, let's get into sales. And they both did phenomenally well, and they made a lot of money, and that was great. And so that was 1995. We kept expanding into larger spaces, and we were doubling our sales every year. And by 1998, end of 1997, we were doing $10 million in sales, and everybody wanted to buy us. So we sold out in August of 1998, and my partner retired. I became president of the company, and of course the buyer said, we're not going to change anything. You just keep doing what you want to do. And of course on day one they started changing things, because that's what
As it
happened.
always happens.
And after about a year, my wife said, Bruce, you have to get out of there. You have to leave. They're destroying your baby. You come home every day aggravated. You're miserable. I can tell the signs. And she'd seen it before. So I said, well, you know me better than I know myself. So I waited a couple of months, and after I got my bonus for the previous year, actually we had increased sales 30% that last year I was there. That which was $3 million on top of 10 million. So we were doing okay. And I told them I wanted to leave, and they said, no, we don't want you to leave. And so we weren't doing anything except just growing the business, and that was okay. But I wanted to go out and start acquiring a lot of other screening companies to really make it grow. And they didn't want to do that, so I decided I'd tell them I'd leave. I said, anytime in the next 6 months, I'm not mad at anybody. I said, I'll stay around for whatever you need. We'll tell your people on Monday morning, and Tuesday will be your last day. And I said, okay. I was a little shocked, but okay, that's how it was going to be. We told our people on Monday morning. I had a little presentation all prepared for them. I couldn't get through it. I broke down crying. I had 120 people, and I built this company from three of us. It was, just a
It was
lot.
your baby. It was your
It was my
baby. Yeah.
baby. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, that Tuesday night they threw away a goodbye party for me, and I went goodbye. And Wednesday morning, I was home. I started getting phone calls from people offering me jobs in the industry, and they were very good jobs. I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I have a non-compete that lasts for 3.5 more years. I signed a 5-year non-compete when I sold the company, which I didn't think was unreasonable. And they said, well, that's too bad. We'd love to have you. And I said, can't do it. I had one fellow called me, and I had worked with him convincing the banking committee in the Senate to change the FCRA, because at one time, most people don't know this, but at one time they changed the FCRA to say that you cannot report anything over 7 years old, even convictions. And we knew that was wrong and inappropriate. And we worked with the banking committee, he and I, to get that changed back to, non-convictions could not be reported over 7 years as opposed to convictions. And he called me up and said, Bruce, I'm running a $2 million screening company that's 100% facts in, facts out. He said, I'm working 14 hours a day. I got a lot of people here. I'm going crazy. You come down, automate this, take over the operations. I will give you 50% of my business. And I'll go out and do the sales. We'll blow this thing up and sell it in 5 years and make a lot of money. And I would have loved to have done that, but I told him I couldn't because I had 3.5 years left in my non-compete. Well, in that case, I want you to sell my company for me. I said, I'm not a business broker. What do I know about selling a company? He said, you sold your company. You did great. I don't have time to do it. Sell my company for me. So I thought about it. Next day I called him back and said, okay. And I put together a little agreement and sent it to him, and he signed it. And 3 months later, we sold that company. And now I'm a mergers and acquisitions intermediary niching in the background screening industry. So we've come a long way from, getting fired way back in the 500 Fortune 500 company I worked for in the drug screening, through the stumbling into the background screening industry, building up a company, selling it to First American, which is now the First Advantage, which is the largest screening company. So I consider and be proud to say that I was instrumental in starting First Advantage, one of the biggest company in the industry. I don't have anything to do with them for years. As soon as I got out, nobody ever called me about anything. And of course I was also a founding member of PBSA, and I was on the recruitment retention committee. So I donated to PBSA my entire database of all the contacts in the industry, which was very helpful in us communicating to the outside world that there was going to be a PBSA or NAPBS at the time. And that was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. He and myself and Barry Nixon and a few other people helped making that all happen. And so here we are today, and it's been a great run, and I've been enjoying it and plan to continue enjoying it as long as I can keep kicking.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce.
That's impressive, Megan. I'm gonna shoot it to you, but I just want to say, a true entrepreneur right in front of our eyes, right here, right? Pivoting, and building the industry as you went. Pretty impressive, Bruce. Amazing.
Yeah, I was going to say background screening. That phrase is practically synonymous with your name. I've known your name before. I haven't met you until today. But we're here to do our 9/11 episode, which you are the perfect man to speak on 9/11 and background screening, because we know you've been around since the beginning and you're still here. It's hard to believe, but it's been almost a quarter of a century. And I could go on and on about how that makes me feel old, but it really just gives me the chills, and it causes me to pause. Personally, I really vividly remember that morning. Background screening was nowhere on my mind. I was 18 years old, and I was in York, Pennsylvania, which was scary for my parents because we were right near Schwenksville, or I believe where the other, get the wrong name, but one of those places where that plane went down. And I was in my dorm. I remember coming out of my shower like a crazy blah blah blah, and everybody told me, they're like, stop. I'm like, what? And we're watching the news, and I just couldn't really process. But I do remember just calling my parents, trying to get all my sister, because we're in New Jersey, we're right near Philly, we're kind of a prime target. And as this was New York, it was very scary. But yeah, 9/11 was rough. And then I remember a bunch of guys from college, they all joined the army. I didn't ever see half of them again. But that was a life-altering moment, and I don't think I realized it at the time. Bruce, what's your 9/11 story? Where were you? What were you doing?
Actually, in the morning, I was uh, again, I was working for myself as a consultant, and I was living in Clearwater, Florida, and I was living on the ninth floor of a 12-story condominium right on the Gulf of Mexico. And I went out every morning for a walk for about an hour, and I walk on the beach, and I'm walking back, and I was listening to my Sony Walkman. Anybody might not remember those things, but I was listening to a book on tape, which I always did, and the book was over, so I just put on the radio. And all of a sudden they say, well, a plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. And of course, like everybody else, some stupid guy in a little Piper Cub, made a mistake. And about that time, I got back to my condo. I walked up my nine flights of stairs, went into the apartment, and I turned on the TV to see what was going on. And of course, that's about the time the second plane crashed into the second World Trade Center too. And it was like, oh shit, oh my God, this is not good. And obviously it wasn't. So it was, it was, like you say, it was impactful. I guess that's maybe the right word. It was like, what do we do now? What's going to happen next? What's going to be, and who did this? And I know we were supposed to go visit my son, who was living in Austin, Texas at the time. We were in Florida, and we were supposed to go the next day on 9/12. And so we called him up when we could get through. And he says, well, I said, no planes are flying. We're not coming. He says, well, what can I do? I don't know what you can do except maybe go give blood or something. We didn't know what to do. We had no idea what to do. It was terrible. But that's reality. Every day after that, things started to get slowly get back to quote unquote normal. Never got back to normal. And its impact on the screening industry is a little bit hard for me to measure because I wasn't in the screening industry at the time. I was a consultant to the industry. But I think the biggest impact of all that was that everybody talked about background checks. And, I know, I mean, I used to go to SHRM conferences and exhibit there, and HR people come by and say, who are you using for their background checks? And they'd laugh and say, we think that's an invasion of privacy. We shouldn't do that. And, you should be able to determine if somebody can do the job or not without getting their backgrounds. And all of a sudden, all the things that we've been preaching for years about background checks and the need for them, came right to the forefront in everybody's living room. And I think that changed things a lot in terms of end users, in terms of how they view the need for background checks. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, but that's what I feel.
So that was the big change, right? Like it stopped being a part of convincing people the need and the reason why it should happen, and it became an obvious need for everyone. So that was the biggest pivot, it sounds like, from that moment on.
Yeah, I think so. That's my perception of it.
Yeah, interesting. I myself was in the US at the time, although I was here as an exchange student in high school and really not understanding the magnitude of it. I come from a country, there's no wars. I think even if we tried, we'd lose. Our army is just, it's fighting with drug dealers on the streets, kind of what they do. But I wasn't sure what was happening. And being here in the US as a foreigner, when that was happening, it was so scary to me. Melissa, what were you doing then?
I just remember I was waking up. I used to listen to talk radio when I was during that time, and just waking up hearing that there were dogs going through the airport. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And I turned on the TV, and it was right at that moment when the second plane was crashing into the building. And it was just a surreal moment. I can still just see everything that was happening at that moment. It was just very surreal. And at the time, my mother and my sister worked in the tallest building in Atlanta in AT&T. And I just remember just being terrified that, like, was Atlanta next? Or, like we were, all kind of wondering, like, is this like an attack across the country? Is it one thing? And, but yeah, it was just, that was just a surreal day.
So you did answer the biggest shift was. Is there any regulatory shift that came with this besides the obvious, I guess, social shift in the need for the background screening? Like, were there even a lot of regulations on that at that point? Like, where were we with regulations?
Oh, no, we had the FCRA back then. I mean, that was changed in 1997 or 97, I think, that people really started recognizing that we are, in fact, a consumer reporting agency, although I had argued first a couple of hours with a guy from the Federal Trade Commission that we were not a CRA. And this was really the whole thing. It's not for the credit bureaus and not for background screening companies. And finally, he got all done with me. He said, Mr. Berg, he said, I want you to know one thing. What? You are a CRA and you have to abide by the rules. Okay. And it's interesting. In that first go round of that's I mentioned earlier that the first FCRA update in the 1990s said that you couldn't report anything over 7 years, anything. And I got a call from USA Today. They interviewed me because they said, what happens if you're doing a background check and you find a, criminal record on somebody that you feel it really needs to be reported, but it's over 7 years old? You legally can't report that, can you? I said, no. He said, well, what would you do? I said, well, we had a case exactly like that. He said, what was the case? I said, we had a janitor who was applying for a job in a school, and they were doing a background check, and sure enough, he had a prior conviction for sexual child molestation. He was applying for a janitor, and it was over 7 years ago. And they said, you can't report that? I said, look, I don't know what the legalities are except what I read in the book, but I said, there's not a court in the country that would stand behind that law in that kind of situation. I said, let's just say that the employer did not hire that person.
Thank God.
So, So but that had been changed already by 1998, and that got fixed. So if it hadn't been, that would have fixed it for sure, no question about that. The other thing, I guess, on the negative side, that I think doing background checks, I think brought the fact out in the open that there is an industry, and there are some substantial companies in the industry, and the lawyers have then found the industry, and they started suing CRAs for noncompliance, and that's been a big pain in everybody's business for a while, and will continue to be.
How did you lobby? How did you lobby? Like, how did you lobby this change in this law? Like, give us a little bit because it's not the easiest thing to do, right? I think, like, I know Melissa is involved in trying to. Then she can speak more to this than me. But like, how did you get that done back then?
Well, I was pretty naive, so I just picked up the phone and called the senator that was the senior person on the banking committee, and I got through to him and started a conversation. And I told him who I was and what I did, and I said, "This is the law," and I said, "This is just wrong." I said, non-convictions, fine, wipe them out after 7 years. Non-convictions, wipe them out immediately. I don't care. Once it's been adjudicated, if it's not convicted, I don't care if it's wiped off, and nobody should know about that anyway if he's found not guilty. But a guilty person, I said, it has to be reported, and they changed the law. And as a matter of fact, at the time, I read the FCRA, and I read it many times because I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand lawyerese, but I think the FCRA says that the federal law supersedes any state law. And yet California still has a 7-year limitation on this, and other states as well. But I didn't try and fight that battle. It wasn't mine to fight. I'll let Trump handle that.
Looking back on the post 9/11 time, must have been a little bit crazy, but what lessons from that time still apply to how we think about screening today?
I'm not sure. I just think that what you learned is that you got to do background check. I mean, you have to. You have to know your customer. You have to know your employee, and you can't just do it once. You need to do it on a regular interim basis because people aren't going to, an employee's not going to come in and tell you they just got arrested for a sexual assault. They're not going to tell you that, and they're on a bail. They're not going to tell you that. So, early warning messages and signs and things like this.
We're kind of in another upheaval now, of course, not as catastrophic as what happened in 9/11, but just as it's the industry is in a shift with the AI, the automation, consolidation pressures, cost pressures. What parallels do you see today to that post 9/11?
This industry has always been challenged with technology, and the people that have used technology have ones that have progressed. I mean, I remember trying to convince people they should get off of fax and phone orders and get onto one of these third-party software platforms, and it was very difficult to convince people to do that. And when they finally did, of course, they said, "Wow, this is amazing." And I think it's the same thing with every technology that comes along. I think like the automated data retrievers and getting the information direct electronically from the courts. People, scoffed at that and said, you couldn't do that as well as a human being, and just not the case. And we had field researchers that say, "Oh no, that court website online is not the same as the one I look at when I go in there," and that was 99% not true. And so I think it's the same with AI. People say, well, they're going to say, well, I didn't use AI to do this. I did it with a human being. And you can say that all day long, but you're going to be the company that does grow, not the company that does grow. Because I talked to a client yesterday, and they said, "Look, we're really having trouble. We don't want to compete on price. We don't want to compete on price." And I said, "Well, then don't get into this industry because you have to compete on price." And they said, "Well, we can't make any money at these low prices." I said, "Yes, you can. You think the people offering these low prices aren't making money? They just figured out how to have low costs and good turnaround time and happy customers, and that's what it's all about. You have to figure out the same thing. Can you help us do that? Of course I can help you do that, but that's what you have to go to." So the technology will help people be able to be price competitive. And and remain strong in the industry.
So it sounds like to me your biggest challenge throughout all these years has been really changing the status quo and convincing people that the new way is the way moving forward, which I think it's the challenge for any early adapter or entrepreneur mind, is to let everybody see what your vision is and what you can see ahead of time. And that's so interesting because that kind of scenario repeats over and over again.
Good
Yeah.
point. Yep, absolutely. And it will continue to repeat that way, yes.
Yeah, and as you were kind of talking about earlier about the progression of businesses being acquired and mergers and how that's led to some of the larger bureaus. We see like with the credit reporting where we have just three major bureaus, and I mean we kind of see background screening heading to that. Do you think that it's going to stay that way to where there's a handful of players that are controlling the market?
I'm not sure I'd use the word controlling, Melissa, but surely dominate. 80% of the market is involved in 5 or 6 different companies. And so do they own the market? Well, no, because other background screening companies are doing just fine. They don't have to be $100 million companies to make a living and serve the clients and do a good job. So I don't think we're going to get down to 3. I don't see that. I don't think we'll get down to 50. I think that there's always an opportunity in this industry to open your doors and bring in clients. And when you look at somebody like First Advantage or Hire Right, who always reported they lose 5% of their customers every year. I mean, 5% of $1 billion worth of sales is $50 million. Now, you tell me one background screening company that wouldn't be thrilled to add $50 million to their sales, or even $5 million to their sales. So I think, the real challenge will come to the rest of the industry is when First Advantage and Hire Right get back to basics and just do what they should do, which is quality work, do it fast, help people out when they have a question, and be price competitive. That's how they're going to grow. I don't think they've quite figured that out yet, based on the fact that they're 5% of their customers.
Yeah, so with that, with drug screening and other workforce risk services, as you kind of mentioned, you mentioned getting back to basics, but that's also, it looks like a trend across the CRAs that are out there kind of adding these elements. What do you have an opinion about that as far as adding on these ancillary services?
It's an interesting historical fact that background screening companies do a terrible job at doing drug screening, and drug screening companies do a terrible job at doing background checks. I to this day, I've been in this 35 years. I'm not sure why. Okay, but it's true, and there's absolutely no reason. I mean, a background screening company should offer drug screening, and they should be experts in it, and they don't have to have their own programs to do it. There's third parties that will process everything for them and do everything for them, but they should definitely offer it because it's one more thing for the salesperson to talk about when they're talking to prospective clients. So that's for sure. And any other technology that comes along, yes, adopt it, figure out how it's going to work best for you, and how it's going to improve things for your client.
Quick question, Bruce. Yeah. Real quick. Do you see the direction that is going for background check companies to be the one-stop shop for their clients? Like, do you see that that's kind of the direction it's all going? You mentioned we should offer background checks, we should offer drug screening. Is that, in your eyes, the direction this should go, with all the companies offering all the services and kind of being like their client one-stop shop?
Well, let me turn that into a question. Do you see the payroll companies adding background checks to their services? Yes. Do you see, well, ADP was the original one. They bought a screening company back in 1997. And, they're happy to give the background screening away if you were a payroll company. So they thought that was a good idea, and they still do, because they still do that. Same thing with the PEO work, professional employer organization work. I mean, big payroll companies do that. Background screenings don't offer that. Why not? Why don't background screening companies offer an employee assistance program? I mean, that fits right in with HR. HR is the buyer of that. Why don't you have something else to sell to that buyer? And, there's other type of services like that. Should background screening companies offer payroll services? I don't know why not. Payroll services offer background checks. All you have to do is partner with somebody that's willing to be your back end to do it all. And there is a risk, of course, that you might upset your client if your new service provider isn't providing the same service that you would like to provide. But you have to take risks and move forward. So yeah, I think one-stop shopping maybe, but HR people like that. They happy to get one invoice a month and sign it and get it paid rather than dealing with 14 different providers.
I think to your point with that is where CRAs and in the industry, especially like what you mentioned, like with the drug testing as well, like where that's so important for us to maintain strong relationships in the industry, to unite with others. Like if you're really good at this thing and I'm really good at this thing, let's work together. So for that client that wants that one-stop shop, that we're able to provide that in a way that's meaningful. I think you made a good point about that. Not to try to just do it all on your own, but to actually work with others that can help you provide something that's really special.
Definitely. So how should companies balance speed, cost savings, because we know it's all about cost, and automation with accuracy, fairness, and candidate experience? And I know the answer to that is something that everyone has been searching for. So it's kind of a hard question, but I'd love to hear your answer.
I always look at the old balance scale. You know, in the old days, you had a scale and you put a little weight on one side and it would go down like this, and then you put a little peanuts or whatever you're weighing the scale, and it would eventually come up and say, okay, it would balance out, and that's the balance. Well, in the background screening industry, we have speed, accuracy, and cost. Those are the three factors. And you have to balance all three of those. I don't know if you can find a scale with three things, but anyway, you have to balance all three of those. And you have to do all three of those better than everybody else. And if you commit to doing that, you'll succeed. You got to have the speed. Nobody's going to wait a week to get their background check done. They're going to find somebody else everybody else promises to do it in less than 2 days. The price has to be competitive because otherwise somebody's going to take the business away from you. And if you make a lot of mistakes and they catch you at them, you're going to lose that client, period.
Yeah, I think the way a lot of people have done it and the way that I see it, really the only way moving forward, of course, automations can't fight it. That's the world we're in, right? That really
People are.
decreases the price. Well, I mean, that's where we're at. But there's an element of the human touch, of the human behind doing the checks, the quality, the making sure things are right in place that we can ever eliminate, at least that I see it. And that part, I think, is the challenge for most people. How do they continue to grow their teams in a cost-effective way to support, right, the work that's being automated, essentially?
Well, I heard somebody say once when they were talking to a prospective client and they were considering this CRA versus one of the big boys. And they just said, are you interested in working with the largest company, or are you interested in working with a company where you would be the largest client?
I guess it all depends on which direction you're wanting to go.
You want to be a big fish in a small pond, or you want to be a small fish in a big pond? You know, from a client standpoint, we will give you better service than you're going to get from, you name the big company.
Yeah. So coming back to 9/11, if 9/11 was a wake-up call 20 years ago, Bruce, what's today's wake-up call in the background check industry? I know we kind of talk about it, a lot of the direction that's going, but where do you see are the biggest opportunity beside anything else that maybe we didn't touch on that you're kind of seeing that's gonna come towards you or towards all of us?
I have to default to AI. I just think it's going to change the internal structure of the screening companies and improve what they're doing, and allow them to be able to be more price competitive. I think companies like the Work Number are now being challenged in court in terms of the claims for monopolistic control of that data. And there's a lawsuit going on right now. It's in process. And there are competitors coming out in that regard. And then you've got the situation with blockchain, and creating a identification in your wallet of who you are and all your your past credentials. Well, it has a potential to have an impact, but that system is very much complicated by the fact that the criminal record search that's done today is outdated tomorrow. And it's hard to fill that blockchain with data that's valuable, that's current and up to date. There are companies trying to make that happen, and they're very much challenged in that regard. But again, we're moving in that direction where you're going to, put your phone in front of us, whatever, and there you are. There's my social media history. There's obviously my educational histories in there put in by the universities and my schools or whatever. And here's my past criminal record that was a clear and 4 years ago. So all that will speed things up, and the people that are involved in making that happen, I think will have a competitive advantage. And ID verification is one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that's another service that CRAs have to be involved in. I go back to the old days. I used to tell the HR managers, I said, before you interview anybody, even talk to them, I said, get a picture of their driver's license. How do you know who they are, who they say they are? I mean, that's not proof anymore because people get fake driver's license. But at least it's something that you've got, that you did get that, and here's the name and address, and they can then do a social search and make sure it matches up to that address and so forth. So ID verification, which is much more sophisticated today, obviously, than getting a copy of the driver's license. That should be a key part.
You've mentioned social media screening a few times, and I know Izzy's question was like, what is the 9/11 of today? And personally, my 9/11 for me right now is all of the shootings, the violence, and how social media screening is actually being used to curtail that. So to me, that's my 9/11 today. And I think it's interesting how different platforms are using the data to try to predict social media screening. I'm like, why is not everybody doing that? It feels like that would be after 9/11, because they talked about that stuff online. That social media screening seems like something we should be doing on everyone.
Yeah, and social media screening is not only for the negative aspects, but it's also for the positive aspects. Part of that screening is, the guy was a little league coach, and he was coach of the year, and he did it for 3 sports, and he's a leader in his religious organization, and whatever. Those are all positive things that make for a better employee versus not knowing that.
And honestly, I never thought about it like that. I always look for the bad, the negative, but our background checks and screening can be good. Like if you screened us, all 3 of us, I would say you're going to get good results.
Bruce, any final words you want to throw in there? Anything, any final considerations, any last words before we cut?
No, I just appreciate you asking me to come on. I appreciate your patience and let me tell 5% of my story. I get to go on for hours, but it's been a great run, 35 years so far, and we're moving forward. And I'm glad I'm healthy enough to continue doing this. And for those people who will be at the PBSA conference in California, I look forward to seeing you all there. And thank you guys for having me on. I hope this has been interesting.
So interesting.
I mean, your story is literally the story of the background check industry. And I think that is just, thank you for sharing that with us.
You betcha.